Hello and welcome. Happy Fat Tuesday to you all. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the Way of the Cross, a Passion Pilgrimage Through Song. My name is JJ Wright, and I'm the director of the Notre Dame Folk Choir. And together with my closest collaborators and some students in the folk choir, we're thrilled to spend the next several weeks discussing the Passion with you all, and really how it's changed our lives over the last 3 years. We'll journey together through the Lenten and Easter seasons and look at how the Passion and Resurrection help us reframe and stay present with both the wonderful things in our lives, but also the hard stuff. We're very excited and humbled by the amount of interest in this program. As of just now, we have about 1,350 participants registered to join us over the next 14 weeks. And I'm also very grateful to our co-sponsors of this program, including the Mendoza College of Business, the Department of Theology, Campus Ministry, and the Notre Dame Alumni Association. We're so grateful to all of our partners for helping to spread the word and all their support along the way to get us to here. The format of our discussion today, I'll speak for a little bit up front, and as you can see, we have some participants with us. At about 1:15, we'll share a forum, and we'd love to hear your questions and do our best to answer them. So be on the lookout at about 1:15 for that form. You can ask a question at any point. Maybe we could send this form out right now, because you can ask a question at any point during the conversation, but likely we'll get to them at that 1:15 time. All right, and now I'd like to welcome our guests and introduce our conversation a little bit. We're joined by my friend and colleague, Professor Kim Belcher from the Department of Theology. And Kim is a wonderful liturgical scholar, of course, but has been just an incredible collaborator along the way as we've built our Passion and all of our understanding of the Passion over the past couple years. I'm also thrilled that we have two students from the folk choir joining us today. Anna Stodd is the co-president of the folk choir, a senior in the choir, and is also majors in economics and English. And Noelle Dorval is a first-year student in the choir and majors in biology with a minor in science and patient advocacy. So thank you all for being here. We're so thrilled to get the chance to talk to you all today. So I'm going to start a little bit here by just talking about why the Passion. It's a very relevant topic for us here on this Fat Tuesday, the day before Lent. Lent starts tomorrow on Ash Wednesday. But to answer this question very simply and quickly, our hope in exploring the Passion and creating this artwork that has been the result of our process is to build an environment where students can learn to talk about the hard things, or as we've been calling them, the wicked problems. So these are the things that we know we're all facing that are difficult in life, and especially for our students who are in this formative period in their lives, giving them an environment and a context to talk about these things with their peers, which we think is so important in faith formation. As a result of this kind of 3-year process that I'll get a chance to talk about here in a second, what we now have is a 90-minute musical representation of the Passion story that is performed by the Notre Dame Folk Choir. We're very excited. This weekend, we head out on a tour of the East Coast to premiere this work. So our first concert will be in Buffalo on Monday, after we perform it on campus here for a theology conference that Kim is helping to host. But we're very excited after kind of a 3-year period where originally we were invited into creating a Passion for the Notre Dame Children's Choir. Back in 2014 and 15, I collaborated with the Children's Choir on a piece called O Emmanuel for Advent and Christmas. And we created a beautiful album of sacred music. And this project originally kind of stemmed out of that experience. And like I said at the beginning, our hope was to look for some environment where we could invite students and young people into conversations about the stuff that just isn't going right, or the stuff that they don't like about the church, or that just isn't working for them in their faith life. At around the same time we were asked to create the Passion, Notre Dame introduced the forum topic for that year, which was 2018-19, as the clergy sexual abuse crisis. And I think this was a very bold move by the university. The hope was really to ask students, staff, faculty, the whole Notre Dame community to reflect honestly on the clergy sexual abuse crisis and understand what the concept of shared responsibility might mean for all of us in our church. And so in my own life, this became a very interesting point of departure to understand the Passion, because when I thought about the Passion and I thought about the clergy sex abuse crisis, I started to see some things in common, especially when we think about betrayal, we think about being unwilling to speak up, unwilling to stand up for those who are most vulnerable. It's pretty easy to see the parallels. One of the wonderful things about being at Notre Dame, of course, is this boldness that I talked about. We, in this Notre Dame family, we have this challenging environment where we have the opportunity to learn how to trust each other, to put our trust into each other, and as a result, be able to rise to a new challenge. So this, I keep coming back to this idea of the hard things, but this is really our goal, and I really want to make sure that that gets communicated clearly, because it's, as we all know, kind of coming out of the midst of a 2-year period like we have in the last 2 years, it's very, very simple just to turn away from the things that we don't like or that aren't going well. And one of the incredible things about the Passion, about the Christian faith, is that we're constantly invited back into this conversation with Jesus, with God, to understand who we really are and try to figure out the ways that we can become who we want to become. So, like I said, this process, fast forward, we've got this piece. Why song? Why do this through music, right? And one of the incredible things about music is that it allows us to become co-creators in something that we're trying to become more of. Co-creators in something we're trying to become more of. We get to embody these actions in community. We get to learn the words. We get to learn the melodies and sing them and try to make them beautiful with other people. It seems simple, but it's really just a simple thing that we do inquire when we try to make sacred music. This doing it with our body we try to make our body like a piece of art. We try to form ourselves into something that is more sacred, more beautiful, more holy, and then most importantly, we intentionally conform ourselves to a bigger shared goal. Something like the Passion. There's any incredible number of impressions that people can have, insights that people can have, and when we commit to something like the Passion, it's incredible because this goal is bigger than us and helps us focus as a community. Like I said, the Passion helps us stay committed to who we hope we can become. Okay, we get to live through Jesus' experience. We get to sit with him. We get to walk with him as Mary washes his feet at Bethany, as he washes the apostles' feet in the upper room, as the institution of the Eucharist at the Last Supper, when he's walking up Golgotha with the cross. We get to be with him. We get to watch and imagine ourselves in these scenes with Jesus and kind of see all the ways in which we fall short. And somehow, as we're watching all these ways that we fall short, we learn through the Passion that these very things are redeemed through the resurrection. And that is the journey that we are inviting you on for these next 14 weeks. As the folk choir, like I said, we're thrilled to be able to go out, to be able to perform this work, to share all of these things that we've thought so hard and practiced so hard to create. And our journey, like I said, goes through Lent, goes through Easter, and will end in Jerusalem. We'll take a pilgrimage with the choir in May, and we'll have the opportunity to see these sites that we're singing about, be in these places that the Passion happened, and also to record this new piece there in Jerusalem. So we're very excited to bring you along this path with us. And I answered a little bit here, but I'm going to now pass it over to some questions for our panelists. Like I said, feel free to please ask a question anytime, but my first question is for Anna. I kind of hit on this a little bit, but I thought maybe you could kind of give us the brass tacks on what is this Passion?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having us. We're so excited for everyone to be watching. And so, yeah, what is this Passion? So like JJ said, it's a 90-minute musical production of sacred music. So it's all newly composed music and text. It's based on, so we have a libretto or a script that kind of tells the story of Christ's passion, starting at the anointing of Bethany through Palm Sunday, through the Last Supper, garden, basically all the way until Calvary, through the trial and all of that. So the framing device for our passion, it takes place on Holy Saturday, and the disciples are remembering the life and death of Jesus, their friend, in the upper room. So they're scared, they're communally grieving and remembering for the first time, and they're in this like liminal space between death and resurrection. So they don't really know the resurrection is about to happen yet. So in terms of how this looks and sounds like, so we have kind of 4 different groups of people of the choir working on this. So there's the band, and we're joined with some amazing collaborators and musicians. And then we have like a group of leads in the choir who have spoken lines, and our 2 main narrators are John the Apostle and Mary Magdalene. And we also have, in a typical passion play, so we were really inspired by some of like the long tradition of passion plays. There's an evangelist figure, and kind of our evangelist or muse is memory. And then we also have the apostles chorus, and then the full chorus, which is like becomes the crowd. So yeah, it's based on all 4 gospels, plus a lot of references to other scriptures. So the Psalms are really influential in the libretto, but it's been an amazing experience of just like every performance is like a lived experience of the members of the choir, and includes all of their questions and frustrations and hopes. And it's cool because every time, at every stage of the process, it's changed, and also every time you sing it, it becomes new.
JJ, that the framing of the whole thing being set on Holy Saturday, with the apostles in this liminal state between like remembering Jesus' death with this like really fresh grief, and also not yet knowing that there would be a resurrection. That's what initially struck me when I first saw the show last May, because as far as I know, that's really unique among all of the versions of the Passion that I've ever seen or heard of. So could you tell us a little bit about why that framing spoke to you?
Yeah, absolutely. The question myself and the librettist Tristan Cooley kind of were asking as we were developing the project was, how do we make the Passion immediate, right? Like if you're going to do a representation of the Passion, like my hope, of course, is to figure out a way to make it come to life. And as we thought about what the apostles were doing in the upper room after Jesus had died, it reminded me honestly of a lot of the occasions of being in church, kind of being in this space where the doors are closed. We know what to expect. We know the types of things that are going to happen, and we protect ourselves from the things that we're not quite sure about. And I thought this kind of, it's a little meta, I guess, but this framing in itself could be part of the storytelling angle. Like as a participant of the Passion, our hope is that we all get to reflect from that perspective of Holy Saturday on what it's like to have lost our best friend, on what it's like to have lost this person who has promised so much. Both hard things and wonderful things, of course, Jesus promises to his followers. But all the hard things that he promises have now come true, right? So in our own lives, I think this question becomes very interesting when we're presented with the hard stuff, right? Like, what do we do? I know at least for me, my first reaction is, like I said, to turn away, to not look. But what I think the Passion invites us to do is to contemplate, to take a second look. Perhaps the hard things, the things that are in the way, the things that are nagging at me, are the very things that are helping me move to that next place that I want to be, or the next version of myself that I want to become, perhaps, right? And the upper room acts as this space, I hope, as we hope, kind of in our presentation, where we can maybe suspend the fact that we know the passion and the resurrection already happened, right? Like we live in a resurrected world. We live in a world where Jesus has already died. We get to celebrate the passion and resurrection every Sunday at the Eucharist, every day if we like. But in a context that is so familiar and yet so unfamiliar to so many of us, like because we haven't just had the opportunity to reflect on it. How can we make this mystery come alive, become anew in the way that we see ourselves as Christians? So thank you for asking, Kim. I get really excited thinking about the upper room because it's such a great place to reflect from. But I thought maybe I could pass it back to Anna and just ask, Anna, how did you get involved with this project?
Yeah, happy to share. So it was COVID summer, basically. So summer of 2020, and we were all sent home. And I had this opportunity that you guys were going to be reworking kind of the passion. And did any students kind of want to get involved with this? And I love to write poetry. And I also felt at this point, a lot of the things that I loved about the church in terms of singing in the folk choir, a lot of the community aspects, like those just seemed to vanish with like COVID. Like we couldn't sing at mass. I wasn't at Notre Dame in community with people. So it was really challenging. I was really searching for both like a creative outlet and a spiritual outlet. So I just kind of jumped all in. And that first summer, I was collaborating with our librettist, Tristan Cooley, and we were working on the Garden song. And I just loved being able to channel my frustrations with my faith and also just kind of like a macro scale of like global suffering in terms of the pandemic and also confronting systemic racism in the wake of George Floyd. And like all of these things were happening that summer. And I had a lot of questions and frustrations. And I got to identify with the disciples in the garden who were questioning and tired and exhausted and just like utterly confused that like their friend who they saw transfigured in glory was now sweating blood in the garden and in utter agony. So I was really drawn to this space of being able to question and have like a really safe space to explore those questions together. And I just loved a lot of the free writes we did. We were reflecting on scripture over Zoom, and then we were like, oh, I was always in Google Docs working on those lyrics with Tristan back and forth, which was super fun. And we found that the process was really working like throughout that whole summer. So we wanted to get more people in the room. And that's when last fall, at like the height of the pandemic, when the choir, we were singing outside masked 6 feet apart. And
Sorry, and I just wanted to pause there and show, I'm sharing my screen so you can see, these are some of Anna's notes that she took on the garden in particular that are just interesting to show while you're talking, but please go on.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, the choir was not really being able to do what we normally do. So we formed this writing committee of 7 students, and we would work with our librettist Tristan over Zoom. We had weekly or biweekly surveys about specific scenes in the Passion that we would send to the choir and get responses from them and use that as like a source of inspiration. Oh, the light just went off in the room. It's motion detected. I will get that fixed. But yeah, so then like with COVID and like the long winter break, we were really just had the time to dive deeper into the project. And it came after the first performance of it in May. We would do more revisions over the summer. I remember sending our guitarist, Frankie, just audio recordings of melodies I would make up, because I'm not really into music theory or know as much of that, but I was like being able to like create music for the first time, which was really cool. So at like every stage, we were welcoming more students into the libretto process of like writing lyrics, thinking through the theology, and then also getting to write the music itself, which was really cool. Yeah, it's crazy to look back at this was the first free write I ever did in the first meeting. But I know, Noelle, you're a first year student. So now this is my senior year, but you kind of got to jump into this project as it was like well underway. So would you be able to share a little bit about what that was like this year?
Yeah, of course. When I joined the folk choir this year, I was expecting that I was just signing up to sing at mass. I was looking for sort of community, a way to like be accountable for maintaining my faith as I was going into college. And I've definitely found all these things in the choir. But I also got to become a part of this incredible project that JJ and Anna and a lot of the upperclassmen have developed in the face of COVID-19. And it's been a wonderful way to be invited back into the Passion in a whole new way that I had never really experienced before growing up. When I came into the project, I was kind of like how anyone watching this might feel a little bit like now, like, what is this? I was very interested, but I wasn't quite sure of the scope or since I wasn't there for the writing of the Passion. And I was struggling a little bit to find like where I could fit into this project or where I can fit into the Passion, as I think a lot of Christians do when they're trying to like struggle to make sense of where you're fitting into God's world. However, I found especially over our January Tech Week this year, we all came back a week early from Christmas break for this intensive Passion rehearsal and performance week. But over this week, I really began to connect with the project and with my faith a lot more overall. Once we had a lot of the technical aspects of the music secured, I think everyone was able to reflect and relate to a lot of the experiences of each characterized figure in the Passion, whether it be Magdalene, Mary, Peter, John, or just someone in the crowd who I'm in the full chorus. So a lot of times I play people in the crowd. And after January Tech Week, after we were putting the whole Passion together for my first time, I truly felt like I had been invited to mourn Christ and mourn his crucifixion in a way that I had never really before. And I felt like it had helped me reach greater understanding in my faith, which I think is truly a gift. And I think a lot of these feelings came from actively reflecting on what we were singing about, like the text specifically, and also the meaning that comes in a lot of the instrumental music that's behind the text that we're saying. And looking back, I actually remember the first piece of the Passion that I fully listened to was that garden scene, which is the first one you wrote, Anna, which is super cool. So even then, when I was writing reflection on that, it led me to come to deeper understanding and appreciation for both that scene and for the Passion, even though I was coming into the Passion and the project after a lot of it had already been done.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Noelle. It's so great to hear your perspective, especially how different it is from Anna's, but the similarities as well. We keep alluding to this garden song and scene, so I wanted to talk for a second and share just a couple of the things, a couple of the sounds and a couple of the lyrics, so you have some context for what we're talking about here. The first thing I'm going to do is play kind of this original version of the garden song. As Anna alluded to, we kind of have gone back and forth. We've had this libretto that existed, and then we decided we wanted to make an album that was kind of more like proper songs, one a reflection of each scene. And so in this phase of the project, we created this song called The Garden Arrest, and this is meant to be like a little bit of narrating what Jesus may have thought kind of in the garden, like right before, in anticipation of Judas betraying him and the arrest. So I'm going to put my lyrics up there and play a small part of this song. Just make sure this... Can people hear that? Okay, one second. You'll have to excuse the vocals. This is me singing with an auto-tune thing, so. I'll stop it there. And I think what's really interesting about this is we get to see that, which is a proper song. And now if we kind of go back to Anna's free writes, she was kind enough to highlight some of these moments in her own sketches where phrases come up. Trees bend, right? Like leaves bend. We had that phrase that we just heard, betrayed by a kiss. Later in the song, wonder or doubt, who's to say? Going from there, though, how did we get to something that's more like a narrative-based production? I wanted to show you here. This is what the libretto for this scene originally looked like. And one of the great things about the garden scene, and one of the insights that really Tristan found when we were working on this scene, was the parallel, as Anna alluded to earlier, between the Transfiguration and the garden. If you recall, in the Transfiguration, Jesus brings Peter, James, and John, the same three, up Mount Tabor to pray. And then Moses and Elijah appear to all of them, and God says, "This is my beloved son." And so part of the drama of this scene is really being inside of Peter, James, and John's imagination with them, and trying to really understand, like, last time he took us up for this special thing, he was turned into something that we never could have imagined. And how does that somehow gel with him being covered in blood and sweat and dirt and weeping? This beautiful insight that Tristan had, that we always think of the apostles kind of being these, like how stupid that they fell asleep when Jesus was off praying. But the beautiful insight Tristan has, I think, is that they couldn't look. It was too much. It was too confusing, to see your friend in these two different states. And, again, this theme of what happens when we see something that contradicts itself, or that seems to contradict itself, and how does that fit into the things that we live and do every day? So yeah, original there, and then I wanted to show the current, which I'll just scroll here and you can look. We'll have all of these. I'm referencing this folder here on my screen share, and all of these assets will be available to you as part of the asynchronous material for the next lesson. So keep your eyes out for that. All this stuff will be shared. It's much clearer here. You can see that we met this character memory. All the things in blue are things that are set to music. And then I just wanted to show a little bit of what this performance of this scene looked like. So you'll hear some similarities. And can you hear that?
Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane. He brought with him Peter, James, and John, and became distressed.
My soul is sorrowful, even unto death. Remain with me, and keep watch that you do not enter into temptation.
I'll skip ahead a little bit.
Whirlwind had opened up among those trees, their fruits his own now.
And here you could see the way that a song like the one you heard at the beginning is transformed into something that the whole choir can sing.
And leaves bend toward my tired,
It's a wonderful singer from the Sacred Music program named Lauren Lundy.
Reminding me and leaves bend toward my tired eyes, asking if I care to pray in evening's fair.
So I'll stop us there. Like I said, we'll make all this stuff available so you can take a look after today's episode. But one of the things I've kept alluding to also is just this ambition to keep bringing sort of creativity to prayer, or bringing our prayer to creativity. And it's been so wonderful to talk with Kim throughout the process, because I find when I talk to Kim, she figures out how to put words to ideas that I've been hoping I could say for a long time. So I wanted to ask, though, like, why should we try creative composition, creativity in general, when we're looking for ways to engage deeply with our faith?
Yeah, thanks, JJ. And when I got involved in the project last May, because JJ invited me to their sort of premiere workshop performance, I was right in the middle. And in fact, I think I dropped it on my desk and went off of a project working on how to use ritual and liturgy to help people recover from crisis. And one of the things that we see when we look at people who are suffering from trauma, or I would say like in the case of the sexual abuse crisis, a whole church that's suffering from trauma, or a whole population suffering from trauma in the wake of COVID lockdowns, and the demonstrations in 2020, is that we see the need to like engage with the things that symbolize for us like what's been really difficult, but that allows us to engage with that challenge in a way that gives us like some agency, some power. And that's what I think is really exciting about the Passion Project, the process that you and Tristan and the musicians and the students have all developed together, is that it takes some of the things that are really challenging about being a young adult in a church that's been around for millennia, where you can kind of feel like you don't have something to offer. It takes something, that we saw in the sexual abuse crisis, which is like this like kind of top-down power structure that determines what you can and can't, what you are and aren't allowed to say. And it turns that on its head, and it gives us a place where we're allowed, not just allowed, but like encouraged to say things and talk about things that we thought we weren't able to talk about. And that I think is really exciting. And it's something that's really important beyond the Passion that I think like we need to learn how to do all across the church from the top to the bottom, is how to use our creativity to transform our experience into something that can be life-giving instead of wounding. And that's why, like, to me, like using the Passion, the scriptures of the Passion is so central, because what we know about scripture is like, obviously it's scripture, you don't change it, but it's also inexhaustible in its meaning. So it's something we keep coming back to and doing new things with it. So that's what you're doing here, is like taking, texts we've had forever, and then finding new meaning in them in the wake of a crisis that has like a whole complex of crises that have affected all of us. So I'd like to actually throw it back to Noelle, because Noelle has done some really lovely reflection on like what is it like to enter the creative process when something exists, but still you're taking up a creative role in interpretation.
Yeah, I think how students like me who are just sort of getting involved, or maybe weren't as involved as like Anna was in writing it, how they can get sort of the most out of this project, or even listeners to the Passion, right, is through active reflection on what has been created already through the music. So my personal reflection has led me to understand when you're performing the Passion, it's more than a performance. It's this active mourning of Scripture and of Christ. So with the Passion central to Catholicism, there's so many details and lessons throughout the entire production that you can take and apply to areas in your own life. So I'm going to call attention to this other scene that we haven't really touched on yet, which is the Peter scene, which is one that I've really connected to. It's right after Garden, and it centers around Peter mourning his own unfaithfulness. He shouts, "I do not know this man," or "I do not know this man, I do not know this man." And he's in this sort of frustrated breakdown where he's so upset with himself for his own unfaithfulness. And then he's also prepare and mourn the loss of Jesus, who's his teacher, his friend, and his God. So this scene specifically hit really hard for me because it shows me that to truly mourn Christ, you don't have to be a perfect Christian. You can have these lapses in unfaithfulness, and that doesn't mean that you can't be a part of it. In consciously mourning Christ's death through the Passion, I can lament lapses in my own unfaithfulness throughout my life and open myself up to this more active, vulnerable relationship with God. So we can do this through the Passion by using it to tackle what we've come to refer to in our panelists here as the wicked problems of our world and our church. So I think that that's one way students who weren't necessarily part of the active writing can take what we've created, reflect on it, and apply it, and actually get something really meaningful out of it.
Yeah, thanks, Noelle. And I really love that Peter scene too, and I think that's so timely actually right now as we're headed into Lent. Lent is like such a important time for recognizing that not only do you not have to be a perfect person to be a Christian, but you actually can't be a perfect person and be a Christian. And so it's a time for allowing ourselves to kind of reflect on the ways that we've participated in, maybe even unknowingly and unwittingly, in these wicked problems, and to maybe start to take responsibility even for things that aren't our fault. So like to kind of in our reflection, to say like, which is really kind of what we're saying to our young people, is like, these are problems that you didn't participate in making, but we are still watching you step up and take responsibility for turning them around. And I know that's going to be our theme next week, is what wicked problems are reflected in the Passion, and how how the Passion reckons with the various wicked problems and which ones are especially meaningful to us. So I don't know if you want to say another thing about that, JJ, about next week.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this because as I talked about in the beginning, the kind of original way in that I found was through the clergy sexual abuse crisis, and kind of in that semester when this is the semester of COVID, the infamous semester, we had just begun kind of these small groups with the students where we were inviting them into conversations about the clergy sexual abuse crisis. And really the motivation here was whether our students are encountering this or not, while they're at Notre Dame, they're walking into a church where this is very much a reality. And it's very much a reality that hasn't really even been acknowledged, much less considered thoroughly. And my question was like, what can we do to empower our students walking into, a church that is kind of besieged by these issues? And really, the wonderful thing about bringing this to the students was that every time they kind of engaged in this conversation, it was like, well, couldn't this apply to this too? Couldn't this apply to climate change? Couldn't this apply to racial injustice? Couldn't this apply to the way we look at the way women are involved in the church, for example? And the thing that I think we've all discovered from working on this project is that just this understanding of church, and it relates to the upper room, and kind of our thesis of the whole project is that like when we come together for the Eucharist, kind of both the direct sacrament that we received, but also in our communal gathering of Eucharist, we have to remember that this experience empowers and renews us. It really does this. And I think there's this weird kind of equation that's probably not actually an equation, but I find when I bring the more of my heart that I bring to the community, to the Eucharist, the fuller my heart actually can get. It can get fuller than I even thought it was possible. And this happens by sort of like, vulnerably bringing my heart to the table. That's why I hope that I can contribute this through music. It's the thing I know how to speak best. And we hear our students speaking so beautifully about their experience with all the difficult things that are going on in their lives, and Kim as well, through the lens of theology. And it's this is one of the things I hope that we can continue to share with you over our time together in the next several weeks. But at this point, we get to turn our focus a little bit to some of your questions. So Kelsey has been sharing the form periodically throughout the conversation. We welcome very much any questions that you might have, and we'll do our best to answer. In the meantime, we have a question for Anna. And this person says, I'm so excited for this original project that you are also passionately working on. Could you please speak about some of your creative and musical inspirations for the lyric and music you created?
Yeah, definitely. I guess some of my favorite poets that really inspired me are Gerard Manley Hopkins and Mary Oliver. And then also, I remember reading William Blake's poem, Holy Thursday, 2 falls ago. And I read a line and he's talking about like all the suffering that he's witnessing. And it says, yes, can it be a song of joy? And I remember I emailed Tristan and JJ that night, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the question I have been asking, like, can we write a passion album like in this world that is a song of joy somehow, that can exist within that paradox. So that was definitely one of my inspirations. And I guess musically, I remember at least in the phase of when we were trying to make the passion album more of like, I guess the passion, like more into an album of just more popular sounding songs that were like more loosely related to the passion. I remember we were talking about kind of what makes the songs that we listen to just on Spotify on a regular basis, that young people do, so captivating. And I love Taylor Swift. And I remember we were talking about how like her new folklore album was like so beautiful and complex, and how that kind of could also be an inspiration. So it was cool. I think the folk choir has always done a really good job of blending the secular and the sacred in terms of its genre and content. So I think that's just been really exciting.
Yeah, awesome. We had some good study sessions on Taylor Swift throughout the process, so I got to learn a lot too. Someone just asked a question here in the chat. The entire text and music are done by ND people. Yes, and all of our people are affiliated with ND, but much of it has been created by me. Anna, of course, did a lot. Tristan Cooley created the bones of the script. We have 2 other composers named Ike Sturm and Frankie Rousseau. Many other students just created melodies, created little snippets of words. You saw Anna's notes earlier, and so part of the effort, as you can see, really too, is learning how to pay attention to the different ways that the students might be moved to contribute. There was no when we first introduced this to the students, there was really no expectation that it would become what it's become. At least on my part, I didn't know that students would take so willingly to this creative process. And I think part of what's appealing about it is that you can really bring your own stuff to the table, and it gets to fit into a larger conversation. So the passion tends to be, again, one of these places where it's like, I want to talk about hard things in an intergenerational environment. There's young people, there's older people, there's middle-aged people, but how can we really share the things that are deeply afflicting our hearts in an environment like that? I'm not just willing to tell people what my faults are, right? The passion kind of offers the template for us, if you will, right? I was really interested in Peter in that one part when he said this thing. And somehow then we're able to talk about, oh man, I didn't treat that friend of mine the way that I ought to have. And just by being present with the story, we get to, again, see this reflection of who can we be? Who is Jesus inviting us to be here through this story that we get to be a part of? We have another question here. This is for any of the speakers. It's inspiring and relevant to hear how you all contributed your talents to the Passion. Liminal space is a term that may apply to more than one in their faith formation. How did you change as you began to and continue to collaborate in both faith and performance art? From Northbrook, Illinois, I think. Feels like a Kim question, maybe.
Maybe only in the sense that I can put words to the stuff you'd have to say in music instead. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is really one of the things that's really inspiring to me is like these problems that seem like they're too big, and they just, you look at a problem and it just seems like it's so big you could never even take it on. And then you just need one other person that's willing to take it on with you. And all of a sudden, what seemed like it was impossible is not just possible, it's already happening. And like, to me, that's how a lot of these collaborative, but especially like this particular project has really felt this way. As I said, when I went to that demo last spring, I thought I was just taking a break from this book project on, ritual in response to crisis. And instead I found that the thing that I was learning, which is like that working creatively with the symbols of things that have been too scary to talk about, like I was learning that would work. JJ was already doing it with 100 students who had been doing it with him for a year. And that to me was just so energizing to realize that you're not alone working on these problems. And that I think is one of the things that's so powerful about talking about these problems, that like you don't want to talk about them because it feels like there's no way out. But as soon as you begin talking about them, you realize somebody's already found a thread of a way out.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think part of the reason I love the idea of liminal space is because I think one of the things we do when we play music, when we perform, and really any of the arts, is hopefully enter into this idea of liminal space. Can I present myself in a place where possibilities can happen? Ones that I didn't think of, ones that are unexpected, ones that I might not have been open to from this or that person had I not been introduced in this particular way. It's one of the great gifts of being a musician. It's one of the things that we get to share, I think, and talk about quite often, because it's the raw material of what we do every time we sit down to play. And so for me, at least, how has this changed? It's just, it's been an inspiration to me to see that this experience of creating music, playing music, my whole life is much more relevant to other people than I thought it was, which is always a wonderful realization. But someone asked just a quick question here. What was the question you posed to students to contribute to the project in class or somewhere else? And it's a good question, because in the folk choir, we meet 3 times a week. So our students are extraordinarily committed to our liturgical ministry. We meet during the semester every Tuesday evening and Thursday evening for 90 minutes, and then every Sunday morning during the semester for a rehearsal and to sing at Mass at the Basilica of the Sacred Heart. And part of the reality of this project was really only possible because of COVID. One of the first major stories of COVID was that all of these people in a choir got sick, right? And that was terrible news for all people who sing, because that meant it was like target number 1 for things that you cannot do. As a result, at all of the choirs at Notre Dame, we donned our masks, but we also rehearsed outside in a tent, which made it nearly impossible to do any of the realness of choral singing. And so part of what we hoped to do was really refocus on what is our ministry to campus. And our primary ministry is this liturgical ministry where we serve at the Basilica every Sunday. And we were able to kind of record music one at a time in a safe way during COVID. And then alongside that, though, we were really interested in asking the students, kind of like through surveys, through discussions, through small groups, what are the things that and we were very specific. It kind of started with this initial survey of like very broad, what do you think about your faith type questions? What are the things that are the hardest about being Catholic? Or if you're not Catholic, what are the hardest things about having faith? And alongside that, we asked the students to submit like their favorite song, any genre, any time period. And it was cool because we made this playlist on Spotify alongside this giant packet of responses. We had about 45 responses, and this process became the template for what we continued to do over the next several months of asking students for their feedback, try to figure out, as anonymous surveys, so to try to figure out as much as possible what are the things that are most pressing. And our hope all along was, of course, that these responses, that these reflections would deeply influence the artwork itself. And I think it's fair to say that that did happen. Like most of our best insights came from an offhanded remark, came from a comment that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been captured if we weren't actively seeking it. And then somehow those end up being like the jewels of the project. So it's really one of the incredible things about getting to participate in this so far. We got one other question too, which was, will this be available as a purchase for CD or for purchase as a CD? And the answer to that is yes. We'll record the entire thing when we go to Jerusalem this May at a beautiful studio called the Jerusalem Music Center. And next Lent, so Ash Wednesday of 2023, our hope is to put the CD out of the entire piece and to be able to travel a little bit more to present it again. I think we might have time for one more question. If anyone's got a quick one to put into the chat or into the sheet. If not, I have one more question I want to ask him and maybe Anna. Okay. So one of my favorite parts of the piece in the libretto is that the narrator, if you know anything about Passion tradition or the tradition of performed passions, this is a hearty tradition with many examples that go back about 1,000 years. So we're traveling on sacred ground already and creating a passion. But one of the things that's different about ours is the role normally reserved for the evangelist, who is the narrator in a passion, was instead given to a character called Memory. And then Memory has this sort of tag team role alongside John and Magdalene of always grounding us where we are in the story. Here, this is where they brought Jesus. This is what happened. And so I wondered if someone might be interested in talking about why memory. Why is memory important?
I've heard Anna talk about this before, so I want her to talk about it again.
Okay. Yeah, I remember it was like the first table read through last spring. And at that point, Memory was just called Evangelist. And we were like, there's something like, what is the purpose of the evangelist if we have Magdalene and John? And then we had this beautiful kind of invocation at the beginning of the piece where we kind of call upon our muse in like a typical epic or drama. And our muse is kind of Memory. And then we were like, oh my gosh, what if the evangelist just is capital M, Memory? And that was a huge insight that I think was just really beautiful and captured what we were doing throughout the entire process. Because I feel like through the writing of it, we were thinking through kind of the line of like, do this in memory of me, of that we say at Mass every Sunday. And this idea of memory as being more of a lived experience and critical to our identities. And there's something about memories that on an individual scale, like we constantly are failing. Our memories are constantly inadequate, but yet there's something so beautiful and necessary about like a communal need to remember in order to grieve and heal, and also just to tell the story. So it was cool because we were putting ourselves in the upper room and saying, oh my gosh, like the apostles are remembering it for the first time. Like what makes someone remember it differently? This specific encounter by the Sea of Galilee that Peter remembers, like why does he remember that? Whereas Magdalene might remember him washing the feet really well. So that was cool to really dive into like how the characters were really determined by what they remembered. And then as like a structural way to tell the story, it just became the natural narrator.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. Well, that brings us to the end of our time. So I just want to first thank Kim, Anna, and Noelle for joining us today. Thank you to ThinkND for making this possible for all of us. We're so excited to continue with you over the series of the next several weeks. Like Kim said before, our next episode is kind of digging in deeper to some of these wicked problems. And Kim will be a guest on our next episode, as well as Tristan Cooley, who's the librettist, and another student in the choir named Grace Murphy, who's our other co-president with Anna. And we'll talk about some of these thornier topics, like clergy sexual abuse and women in the church and climate change, and see what the Passion might have to say, or the ways the Passion can guide us through thinking about these questions. Please also stay tuned in the coming days for our asynchronous material. Again, we'll post many things that are related to that garden scene and kind of give a little bit of an explainer so that you could click through and see the way that the project developed over time. And as well, please feel free to share this with anybody. We're accepting registrations throughout the entire process. And so send it along to your friends or pass the word. We're so grateful for you to be here. And lastly, if you're in Buffalo, Philadelphia, New York City, or Hudson, New York, we would love to see you next week when we premiere our Passion. So please check out our website for more information on that. Thanks again for being here, and thanks again to our guests, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.